When Europeans turn on their radiators or hit the light switch, they expect reliable and affordable energy to bring them heat and light. That confidence is flickering as energy prices soar. Faced with calls for a bold response, the European Union says it will examine the way its power market is run and will consider calls to revamp regulations. However, the EU insists its plans to tackle climate change must stay on track. Winter is coming. Fears of the impending temperature drop in the Northern Hemisphere have driven gas prices to record highs. Since the start of the year, prices have surged a chilling 670%. Spaniards are struggling to pay utility bills, and Madrid wants the EU to make group purchases of gas, much as it did for vaccinations for COVID. Greece wants an EU fund to help governments weather the crisis. However, other countries, led by Germany and the Netherlands, urge caution. They argue the energy crunch is short-term and related to the unprecedented supply shock following the coronavirus pandemic. Some members fear the energy crisis could lead to social unrest and should take priority over combating climate change. But the EU's climate chief, Frans Timmermans, says there's no alternative.
The levels of social unrest, if we leave the climate crisis untackled, are going to be unsupportable. Our children will wage wars over water and food if we don't tackle the climate crisis. And of course, tackling the climate crisis also leads to a number of difficult decisions, a number of big changes, but let's keep our eye on the ball. The problem here is a climate crisis, and we need to act quickly, and Europe needs to lead so that the rest of the world understands where we need to go.
Next week, the European Commission will propose measures aimed at easing the price surge for consumers and making sure Europe's kettles don't go off the boil.
And for more on this, I'm joined by Leon Izbicki. He's a natural gas analyst with Energy Aspect. Leon, thank you for coming on to the show. I want to start with what happened yesterday when we saw prices explode, wholesale gas prices explode. What exactly happened?
Well, I think, that's a good question. Ultimately, the market has become untethered because we have blown through the traditional caps, so to speak, on gas prices, which are usually the gas to coal switch. And after that, we have also blown through the gas to liquid switch. So ultimately, the market was trying to find a level at which there was further price resistance, in this case, probably also from shedding industrial demand for natural gas. But I think also it's important to highlight that ultimately there is also a large amount of speculation in the market, and this speculatory bubble really was set to burst yesterday.
Remind us, why are some countries more exposed to these spot market rates than others?
So ultimately, this is a question of the amount of stocks that you have in a country, and also fundamentally, really, how much you could actually fill up those stocks over the last summer. So the countries that we're seeing, particularly in Northwest Europe, having historically very low stocks, such as, for example, Germany and Austria, are essentially going to drive up that price in the TTF in order to further free up natural gas demand in order to bring that into storage.
Member states are looking at block purchases as a solution. Some of them are, we should say. Is that a reasonable solution, that the EU does something with gas, sort of like what it did with vaccines, this idea of a purchase for everyone?
I think it certainly is, but I mean, the fundamental question is what European policymakers can really do in the current situation, and fundamentally also where they are going to purchase that gas from, because Asia is showing no signs of essentially losing the price war with Europe that is bidding for LNG cargoes. And simultaneously, there is also this underlying question of whether Russia can actually increase flows to Europe. So while it is a good thing to think about fundamentally purchasing gas en bloc, the question is, where is that gas coming from?
There's been a lot of criticism that Russia hasn't delivered as much as it needs to in a crisis. How do you see it? Have you been able to look and see what they have been delivering?
Well, so fundamentally, I think it's important to highlight that ultimately on a year-on-year level, Russian flows to Europe have increased, but they are still below, around 18% below pre-pandemic levels. And this happens in the context of where we're actually seeing gas demand in Europe grow overall around 3% compared to pre-pandemic levels. So Russia has been meeting nominations on the European gas market. But I mean, fundamentally also, the initial problem is that Russian production has increased, but a lot of that production actually flows into the Russian balance itself as the country is looking to fill up its low storage.
All right. Leon Izbicki with Energy Aspects. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, DW correspondent in Brussels, Marina Strauss, joins me for more. Marina, good morning. So we hear that the EU is encouraging member states to provide relief to their citizens to try and offset some of these rising prices. But is Brussels itself prepared to do anything?
Well, in this case, it's urging its member states, its 20 member states, to help small businesses and consumers, because these short-term measures is something the single member states have to do themselves. But in the longer term, on EU scale, we saw that in the report, some EU member states, for example, France and Spain, are asking for a change of the rules that are governing the EU's energy market. For example, Spain suggested this strategic gas reserve for the whole of the EU for emergencies. And Wednesday next week, the EU Commission will present a toolbox of medium and long-term measures. So we have to wait a bit and see what kind of ideas they come up with. But this clearly shows there is a political will to tackle this issue here in Brussels.
Now, Marina, we also heard yesterday that Hungarian leader Viktor Orban made a connection between rising prices, energy prices, and the rising cost of carbon emissions in the EU. The EU, of course, covered by that emissions trading scheme. Now, those prices have risen somewhat, though not as dramatically. What do EU leaders say to that kind of connection that he's putting there?
I talked to Frans Timmermans, the commissioner or the vice president of the EU Commission who's responsible for climate, we saw in the report. And he told me yesterday that according to the Commission, this is not correct. So he said that those measures are only responsible to a very small extent, a maximum of 1/5, he said. And he claims that putting a price on CO2 emissions is not the problem, but the fact that the market demands are on an all-time high due to EU economies coming out of the COVID-19 crisis. And as other EU politicians, he says that the quicker the EU switches to renewable energy sources, the quicker EU citizens are protected from these energy spikes we saw in the last couple of weeks.
All right, Marina Strauss, DW correspondent in Brussels. Thank you very much. Now, as we mentioned earlier, European countries are certainly not alone in their struggles with energy supply. India is facing a crunch in coal, following a surge there in demand. Now, energy suppliers have recently added over 28 million consumers in India, mostly lower and middle class and poor, who are buying goods like fans, lights, TV sets. Now, it's not just soaring demand. Recent monsoon rains flooded mines and disrupted transport, and that helped send coal prices up sharply for power stations. Now, coal generates nearly 70% of India's electricity, 3/4 of which is mined domestically. State-run giant Coal India produces most of the country's supply and says that it's now on a war footing to ensure deliveries. But supplies for more than half of coal-fired plants are at a critical level. Delhi says that it's even considering rebooting idled power stations. Now, for more on this, I'm joined by DW correspondent Charu Kartikai in Studio Delhi. Charu, good to see you. How serious could this situation get for businesses and families in India?
Good morning, Stephen. It's an anxious morning for officials of the Power Ministry in India, because the situation appears to be very critical as of now. There are 135 coal-powered power plants that the regulatory body monitors, and out of these, at least 16 have 0 days of stock, which means they have completely run out of stock. On an average, these plants have been left with about 4 days of stock. So that's a pretty critical situation. At this point of time, businesses are definitely scared. For households, it's not really, they do not really appear a bit perturbed, because India, these kind of blackouts, it's a very rare phenomenon. Last time India had a blackout, it was in 2012. It was pretty scary though, because about 400 million people were affected on day one and another 600 million on day two. But that was 9 years ago. And of course, memories are still very alive of that blackout. But at this point of time, it is being ruled out that we are heading towards that kind of a situation again.
Charu, how is the Indian press looking at this, for example? Is this an issue Do they see an issue here about energy diversification in India? Did they see it about green policies? Did they see this relating to the pandemic? How's it being handled there?
It's all these things combined, Stephen. One is, of course, the pandemic had led to a fall in demand, so probably the authorities had gotten a bit lackadaisical about how to manage the supply, because post-pandemic, there's been a surge in demand, even though industrial activity is yet to pick up. So this is mostly household demand. As you rightly mentioned in the introduction, that 28 million households have got new connections. So the consumption has definitely gone up. But of course, yes, this is a problem with India's energy mix. As you rightly said, some estimates suggest that coal accounts for about 70% of India's energy mix. We've been trying to go ahead with solar and increase our dependence on solar, but that hasn't been working out very well. There are some estimates suggest that this month, the growth in solar output has fallen by about 40% as compared to on a year-on-year basis. So solar is not really achieving its potential, and which is further increasing our dependence on coal.
All right, by many accounts, a bad year for renewables. Charu Kartikai in Delhi, thank you very much.